Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Congressman Pete Stauber's Telephone Town Hall. We are glad that you joined us. Tonight, you will have the opportunity to hear about the many issues that are important to Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, as well as what Congressman Stauber has been working on in Washington, D.C. You will also be able to speak directly with Congressman Stauber to ask a question. If you would like to ask Congressman Stauber a question, please press *3 at any time during the call. We look forward to a thoughtful and respectful dialogue. Again, press *3 to ask a question at any time. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Congressman Pete Stauber. I am so glad that you all could join me for this telephone town hall. I will start this call with a brief overview of recent legislative action and then open up the floor for you to ask questions. As you heard Kelsey say, please press *3 if you would like to ask a question. I want to begin by saying what an honor it is to represent you all in Congress. I take this responsibility very seriously, and it is forums such as these that help me better represent you in Washington. As your representative in Congress, I am excited to tell you that constituent service is a central function of our office, whether it's helping veterans or seniors secure the benefits they deserve, coordinating a tour of the U.S. Capitol for families visiting Washington, D.C., flying a flag over the U.S. Capitol to commemorate an important event, or helping individuals navigate the difficulties of a federal agency. My staff and I are here to serve you. If you need assistance, then I encourage you to call my office at 218-481-6396 or visit my website at stauber.house.gov. Again, if you need assistance, I encourage you to call the office 218-481-6396 or visit my website at Stauber, stauber.house.gov. You know, it's hard to believe, but we are just over 6 months into the 116th Congress, and while some in the media would have you believe that Congress is broken, I am proud to tell you that I am committed to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to find common sense solutions to the most pressing issues facing our nation. One of the priorities of this Congress is protecting American workers from unfair trade deals. You and I know that American workers can compete with anyone in the world so long as there is a fair and level playing field. Unfortunately, for too long, one-sided trade deals have left our workers at a competitive disadvantage. Fortunately, President Trump recently put the American worker first and negotiated a deal with Canada and Mexico that would eliminate many practices and trade barriers that have long hindered U.S. companies' access to Mexican and Canadian markets. In short, this deal would deliver a win to those working in Minnesota factories as well as our farmers who want to export more of their products. Even though members of both parties agree that strong trading relationships between Mexico and Canada are vital, Speaker Pelosi continues to drag her feet and refuse to bring the USMCA to the House floor for a vote. While Speaker Pelosi delays the approval of the USMCA, our workers and farmers continue to face an uncertain future. And I do want to add, just today, the country of Mexico approved in their legislative process the USMCA. You know, Congress owes it to the American people to quickly enact the USMCA and deliver a new era of job creation and economic prosperity. I promise you all that I remain committed to seeing the USMCA passed. Another issue I am prioritizing is rural broadband. I recently held a small business committee field hearing in Scandia to hear from small business owners and families lacking access to broadband and examine what can be done at the federal level to ensure every Minnesotan has access to quick and reliable broadband. With quick and reliable broadband access, even the smallest towns and communities can compete with the rest of the world. Unfortunately, much more still needs to be done to connect communities across rural Minnesota and America to high-speed internet access. It is imperative that we close the digital divide between urban and rural communities, as broadband is vital to the success of every small business, school, hospital, and student. You know, during this hearing, I was joined by a few of my colleagues, including Representative Jim Hagedorn and Angie Craig. I am thankful to be working with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle on the issue. Together, we can assure that every American family and business has access to quick and reliable broadband. As the father of 4 beautiful children, I believe every life has value and will continue to be a pro-life advocate in Congress. At the moment of conception, every human being shall have all the rights and privileges granted by our Constitution. That's why I find it incredibly troublesome that some of my colleagues have argued that babies who survive abortions should not be given the same level of medical care that other newborns receive. I am a proud sponsor of the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would require healthcare practitioners to provide the degree of care to children born prematurely as a result of an abortion as they would any other child. While common sense and morality would argue that this bill should have become law of the land years ago, Speaker Pelosi disagrees, refusing to bring this bill to the House floor for a vote. Congress must always stand up for the sanctity of life. So earlier today, before the House of Representatives, I asked for immediate consideration of the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. For the 61st time, Democrat leadership and Speaker Pelosi blocked mandatory medical care for children born alive. Rest assured, I will not give up, and during my time in Congress, I will always fight to protect life. I am so honored and humbled to have the opportunity to represent you in Congress. With that in mind, if you want to ask a question, please press *3, and we will get started with the questions. And again, thank you everybody for spending some time with me this evening.
All right, thank you again for joining Congressman Pete Stauber's Teletown Hall. Don't forget to press *3 to enter a question in the queue. I repeat, don't forget to press *3 to enter a question in the queue. Okay, so up next we have Frank, and Frank has a question about transportation. Frank, you are now live on the call.
Yeah, I was wondering if how we get the process going to add a third lane to Interstate 35 from Forest Lake to Hinckley. The backup traffic is horrendous on weekends, and during the day from North Branch to Forest Lake, it's backed up terribly. And I was thinking we should get on top of that before it gets too bad. Would that be possible to get started?
Frank, thank you for the comment and the question. You're exactly right. I travel that interstate quite a bit because the southern part of our district is just in that area. And so you look at the opportunity to kind of look ahead, and for me, it's to bring these issues that are not only supported by like the MnDOT, Minnesota Department of National Transportation, and other communities in that corridor. It's really important that we advocate for that those third lanes in those congested areas, because you're exactly right. When we go down, there's certain times the weekends. If you're coming back down south from the weekend, it is backed up like nobody's business, and then it's also backed up going north on the weekend. So, Frank, to your point, those are all things that are discussed. But what we're looking at in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee is to look at these projects that have value and then put the investment so we can make sure that traffic flows to and from in a smooth, and the most important aspect is the safety of our motoring public. So that's a really good suggestion, Frank. And like I say, I've experienced the same thing you've described, and those are some things that we want to work with MnDOT with, and in particular, make sure that we have a robust transportation and infrastructure package as we go forward here. Thank you, Frank. Very good question.
All right, up next we have Dan, and Dan has a question about what the Congressman is doing in regards to seniors and health care. Dan, you are now live on the call.
Hey, thank you. I was just curious. I know people like myself that have worked 45 years and retired, and now that we're on um, still paying into Medicare and supplementary insurance and all that. It's getting to the point where you can't afford it. A 30-year check is going for your hospitalization and your pills and all that, and there's got to be something done about it, because 45 years, I consider myself a warrior. I paid my taxes, I paid my dues, and I think something should be done to help the seniors on this.
Dan, I couldn't agree with you more. You are spot on. And my elderly parents, my father's 85 and my mother's 83, and they too have paid their entire life into Medicare, and we owe it to them to make sure that they get the services that this country promised. The goal for me is to protect Medicare for those who have paid into it. And you talked about, we could talk about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I can tell you that just recently, out of the Energy and Commerce Commission came a bipartisan, unanimous vote out of the Energy and Commerce that we need to look at drug pricing. We need transparency in our drug manufacturing and allow generics to come into the market sooner. That came out unanimously out of Energy and Commerce. When it came to the floor of the House, Dan, Speaker Pelosi could not help herself by putting 4 affordable care amendments on that. It did pass the House. Speaker Pelosi knew that if it passed the House, Senator McConnell wouldn't even pick it up, nor would the president sign it to become law. So this is the frustrating part of the drug transparency and the drug prescription prices that are costing us millions and millions of dollars across this nation. And as you said, it is not fair that you pay a great portion of your retirement for medicine and prescription drugs. But I want to share this with all the listeners here. That's the stuff that Speaker Pelosi is putting on the floor. Had she not put those 4 ACA provisions, this would have been into the Senate, and it would have been most likely in law very soon, that we hold the drug companies accountable, transparency. We want to know the cost of the drug and be able to get prescriptions in sooner, because that's a benefit for us, the users. And it was just frustrating to see that. But I can tell you that for me, this is so important that we work on this element and make sure that we have the ability to make sure that the pharmaceuticals understand that they're not going to take advantage of America anymore. We've had it, and this is, Dan, I don't know what prescriptions you're on, but we can name XYZ prescription in most Minnesotans, and it's frustrating. So I am working extremely hard across the aisle to make sure that take away the Republican Democrat, do what's right, and the thing which is right is to make sure that those drug companies bring the price of their products down and bring competition into the market.
All right, thank you, Dan. So up next we have John from Cloquet, who has a question about the windfall elimination provision. John, you are now live on the call.
Hello.
Hi, John.
Hi. I'm calling in regards to the windfall tax elimination that took away 50% of my Social Security that I earned. And this not only affect me, it affected every military technician, whether you work for the Army Reserve, the Naval Reserve, the Air National Guard, Army National Guard, or the Marine Reserve. We lost 50% of our Social Security that we had earned through the years, and I spoke to Representative Dolan's office and stuff on this probably a couple of years ago, and there was nothing done about it. The federal court, a 6th District Court, ruled that this thing was illegal to do, but nobody has done anything about it to help the technicians that are retired.
John, thank you very much for bringing up that point. You made a comment that nobody has done anything about it. I will add up until now, because I have co-sponsored H.R. 141, which is the Social Security Fairness Act. This bill repeals the windfall elimination provision and fixes the issue that you just spoke about. This, to me, is common sense, John. Why should you be penalized? Why should you be penalized in your Social Security because you have another retirement? This even on the campaign trail, John, this was a huge issue. And so I agree with you, and I'm fighting for this legislation to move forward, and that we must protect Social Security. My job now in the minority is to make sure that Speaker Pelosi puts it on the House floor for a vote rather than playing partisan politics. So I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm doing on this eliminating the windfall provision, John, you're exactly right. It should have been done years ago, but I want to tell you, I jumped on this bill, and I co-sponsored this bill very early because it's the right thing to do, and you have earned that privilege of taking your Social Security and your retirement fully. Thank you, John. I'm passionate about that. Thanks for the call.
All right, thank you, John. So up next, we have a question from Terry. Terry has a question on helping citizens in rural areas. Terry, you are now live on the call.
Good day. Thank you very much for your time and consideration, Congressman Stauber. We are in need in our rural areas here of Moose Lake and Barnum, especially volunteer drivers who can help us get to our medical appointments in the larger cities like Duluth and so forth. And I interned in Congressman Oberstar's office in 1992 and learned a lot, still have a lot to learn, and I just want to thank you for your service and for your stand on abortion as well. I am a member of the Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life, and also regarding student loans, I went to a private college there in the Twin Ports, and now they are taking my Social Security over $211 every month to pay back student loans, which are mostly interest added onto them. And any help that you can give people like myself would be so much appreciated, and you're in my prayers.
Well, Terry, I really appreciate not only your comments, but that we are in your prayers. That's really special. To your point of the volunteer drivers, I just want to share with you that it's critically important in rural Minnesota that those volunteer drivers who drive their neighbors and patients to medical treatment, they should be treated fairly. And that's exactly why I co-sponsored the Volunteer Driver Appreciation Act, which gives our volunteer drivers the proper tax write-off for their mileage. And not only that, we have to look at what the insurance companies are requiring of our volunteer drivers, who we've had in place for many, many years, helping out in their community. Some insurance companies are treating those volunteer drivers as if it's a business, and that's simply wrong. And what I'd like to do is make sure that this Volunteer Driver Appreciation Act, that it gets to the floor for the vote, because you know what? Members of Congress, and listen, on both sides of the aisle, understand rural transportation, and it's important that we make sure that rural transportation is available and that we take care of these volunteer drivers, because you know what? Sometimes it's transportation alone that will keep our senior citizens in the home that they grew up in and worked for their entire life. So I want to tell you, Terry, that I'm a champion for the Volunteer Driver Appreciation Act. It is so important that we make sure that our volunteers in our rural areas can help our friends and neighbors in need for rides, into the city or to their appointments. And also, I do, Terry, share your love of life. Thank you for the question.
All right. Up next, we have a question from Greg, who has a question on rural broadband. Greg, you are now live on the call.
Thank you very much for taking the time and taking my call. Yes, I listened to you, Congressman, in regards to the rural broadband, proposals and requests. I have lived out just 3.5 miles from a rural community, and not even the phone company, CenturyLink, will bring us even a quality enough line that I could even have a voice conversation, much less data. And there is no other option other than using Verizon and trying to use that as an internet. And I can tell you, at an extremely high expense to us to be able to do so. And because of the limitations of what they impose on us, we're constantly running out of any speed and running at a very low rate. And one of the side neglects of that is because as I'm reaching the older age and need medications, a lot of that has to be accessed online, and now we're being penalized and not being able to access that as well. It just seems like even the phone companies need to be made to install adequate transmission lines to be able to allow this capability.
Greg, I want to thank you for the call and the comment and the concern. As you know, and I've always said this, that rural America, rural Minnesota matters. And for many years, we've talked about delivering rural broadband. A high-speed internet is not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity for a variety of reasons. And Greg, you talked about picking up your prescriptions and what have you. That's how important it is. And we also have to understand that it's important for our schools, for small businesses, for our rural hospitals, to have the ability to have high-speed, reliable broadband to keep us in the 21st century. We're looking at small business expansion in rural Minnesota and rural America. It was 2 weeks ago that I held the very first a rural broadband meeting. It was an extension of literally an extension of the small business committee that I'm a ranking member of, and we held a meeting in Scandia, Minnesota, on the importance of rural broadband and that we matter. And what was disappointing is the gentleman's business that we were at, he said, had I known that broadband was not going to be effective in this area, I would not have located my business there. That was really hard for me to hear, because here's a rural community hiring and employing 10, 11 people in a rural community, good paying jobs. That's important. And so the rural broadband is extremely important. And I have to share this with you, Greg. I was speaking to an individual from the Federal Reserve in Minneapolis, and we were talking about the investment that this country has to make in rural broadband. And he said this to me. He said, Pete, at some point in the history of this country, this government decided to deliver mail to every mailbox in this country. That says it all. We need to make the investment, and that rural America matters. We do not take a back seat, rather, to anybody in the metro or the urban areas. And I can tell you that on the T&I committee, we've talked about, and we have enough representation from rural America that we want to put our words in action. We want the other members of the committee to put forth the investment into rural broadband, because it matters to us. And so, Greg, thanks for the call. I'm very, very passionate on getting this done. And, many of us are impatient because we've heard the federal government talk about it. We want to act now. Let's make the investment to ensure our rural residents have access to it, ensure our schools, keep our rural hospitals open, and keep our business expanding in rural America. So thank you very much, Greg.
Okay, thanks again for everyone who's joined our town hall. Don't forget to press *3 to enter a question in the queue. So up next, we have a question from Kathy. Kathy, you are now live on the call.
Hi. I just wondered where you stand on the gun issues. Basically just all together, not anything specific, just in general?
Yeah, so, Kathy, appreciate the question. Obviously, our Second Amendment is important. It's an amendment to the Constitution, and I've always said this, that I want to support our Second Amendment and allow law-abiding individual citizens the right to keep and bear arms. And that's critically important. And so, Kathy, I'll bring you back to my 23 years in law enforcement, and 22 of them in the city of Duluth. I retired as an area commander. In December of 1995, I was shot in the head by a career criminal and survived, obviously. And so the frustrating part for me was I survived, and the U.S. attorney in Minneapolis would not charge that individual who tried to take my life with felon in possession of a handgun. It was crystal clear, and I know that our detective bureau, John Hall at the time, was adamant that they charged this individual who tried to take my life while off duty, and the U.S. attorney in Minneapolis wouldn't do it. How frustrating is that? That was extremely frustrating for my wife and I, because she was my fiance at the time and witnessed this horrific crime. Furthermore, let's fast forward just a couple years on the job on an address on London Road in Duluth, where we were working on a case involving a hostage situation. I had a career criminal approach me quickly from behind a corner, put the gun to my face and pull the trigger. And by the grace of God, it malfunctioned, and I was literally fighting for my life. Now, with that being said, nobody wants a drug dealer, a career criminal, somebody going through a mental health crisis to possess or purchase a firearm. Nobody. But don't take that right away from law-abiding citizens. So these two individuals continued their behavior and victimized many people. And I want to be crystal clear. About 6 weeks ago, there was a tragedy, an absolute tragedy in Hermantown, Minnesota, where two deputies were involved in a shootout with a criminal. And I mean, it was a tragedy, and the criminal died. Kathy, I want to tell you that criminal that tragically died 6-7 weeks ago in the city of Hermantown was the same individual 20 years ago that tried to take my life. And so I will tell you this. I have love and respect for our law enforcement. What they have to, the calls for service they may have to go on, etc. But I don't believe that me or my wife, who are concealed carry holders, by the way, should be diminished the ability to carry. Because you're not afraid, and I'm not afraid of me or my wife. I am afraid of an individual who's a criminal, who's sells drugs, going through a crisis. That's what I'm concerned about. And so I think together, we can have the ability to make positive legislation on the firearms and the current concerns thereof. If we forget our red playbook and forget our blue playbook, we want to make sure that we live in the safest society there is. We talk about kids going to school. School and our churches should be the safest parts of our community, our worship spots and our schools. And at times they're not. So I just wanted to let you know that for me, I have no more energy and oomph supporting our Second Amendment for individual law-abiding citizens to purchase and possess a handgun if they qualify and go through the proper procedure. But there is nobody, I know, nobody that wants criminals and drug dealers to continue to harm our folks. Kathy, thank you very much for the question.
Okay, everyone. Do not forget to press *3 to enter a question in the queue. So up next, we have a question from Terry, who's from Zimmerman. Terry has a question about the wall. Terry, you are now live on the call.
Thank you for having me. I want to know when we can start pushing and getting that wall through to keep those that we don't want in the United States out and protect the citizens that are here in our country safe.
Terry, thanks for the question from the Zimmerman area, and I just want to share with you that, I just talked to you about my law enforcement past, and when I'd go on calls for service as a Duluth police officer, there was always two sides to the story when I'd go and investigate, and I knew that the truth was somewhere in between, and you worked through that through investigations and re-interviewing and maybe audio or videotape or what have you. But I have to tell you that the issue of immigration and the crisis on the border when it was coming forth several months ago, I said that I wanted to go down to the southern border. And I spent 4 days at the Yuma sector, Arizona border, 126 miles, on the week before Easter. I wanted to go down there and see it for myself, Terry. And they talk about a picture is worth 1,000 words. I can tell you, seeing is believing. The week I was down there, the Yuma, Arizona mayor declared an emergency because their NGOs, their non-government organizations, were being overrun with illegal immigrants. And what was happening, and I'll share this with you, what was happening was I'll give you an example like Lutheran Social Services or the Red Cross or the Damiano or the Chum Center in downtown Duluth. Those are NGOs. Just like in Yuma, Arizona, they were overwhelmed. They were overburdened. The mayor said, we can't handle anymore. So I wanted to go down to see for myself. I went down there and stood on the banks of the Colorado River, which is about 40 feet wide, waist deep, and there's overbrush on each side of the river, on the United States side and the country of Mexico side. It was broad daylight. I'm with the Customs and Border Patrol. They're showing me the area. I can hear people talking on the other side of the Colorado River in the country of Mexico. They're under brush, so I can't see them, but I can hear them. I asked the Border Patrol agent this. I said, if they come over to our country right now, why don't they come during the daylight? And literally he kind of chuckled. He said, Pete, each one of those people pay the drug cartels between $5,000 and $7,000 to get them safely over through the river into the United States. And they do it at night because when they bring 54, 60 people over with a child, it consumes all the Border Patrol resources in that area, which leaves the left flank and the right flank open. That's where the drug runners are sending their coyotes to run drugs across this country. It's happening every single day. And Terry, what I want to share with you is this. I saw 54 people come across the border at night and give themselves up. And guess what? Everyone, with the exception of 2 females, had a child with them. Keep in mind the Flores decision. It was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that said a family, quote, family cannot be detained longer than 20 days at the border. So they're exploiting this law by coming over and they're giving themselves up to the Border Patrol and they say, we are a family. The Border Patrol has to take them at their word because they know they can't prove that they're not the child of that illegal immigrant. They have 48 hours to get as much information and on the immigrant and the child, and they let them go into this country with the promise that between 2 and 5 years they'll show up in court for their asylum hearing. We know less than 10% show up. And this is where the term catch and release is all about. And so I'm asking the Border Patrol. I asked the Yuma Sector Chief, I said, sir, do you have a crisis down here? He looked at me and he says, we have a crisis. We are overwhelmed. I went to a detention facility that was originally built for 246 illegal immigrants, or 246 people. The day I was there, they had over 1,100 illegal immigrants trying to process in a detention center. They actually had to expand out in the parking lot, and then get portable air conditioners. And I have to tell you, Terry, for me as a father of four, to look into those children's eyes who were being trafficked. The Border Patrol says they go into this country, females were flying back to Guatemala and El Salvador, the kids, and then they rent them out to the cartels to have their illegals pay the cartels $5,000 to $7,000 and grab the kid again and walk across. It's cyclical. And I believe, Terry, Congress has to act. Speaker Pelosi will not touch this issue, and being in the minority, there's nothing we can do at this point other than show her there's a crisis at the border. Now, people are starting to talk about there is a crisis at the border. I'm going to share with you, Terry, that I asked one of my colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, I said, you go down there and we'll talk when you come back. He says, got it, Pete. My Democratic colleague went down to the border. He came back. He says, you are right. There's a crisis, and we need to do something. That's my good Democratic friend, and he understands. So now we have to get the Speaker to say, we have some issues. We need to put forth funding for those children right now because we're running out of funding, and the President has requested this several weeks ago. So we have a crisis. Before I end, Terry, I want to tell you three things when I was down there. The Border Patrol, these are the experts. These are the absolute experts, said there's three parts to the equation to secure and have credibility on our borders. It is a physical barrier or a wall. It is increased technology, and it is personnel. Those are the three things that those experts in law enforcement that are protecting our border have requested from us in Congress, and my goal is to help deliver that. But it's frustrating when we have a Speaker of the House who wants to politicize this issue, and so we're working on it. And I'm not, from my law enforcement background, Terry, I believe this nation is a country of law and order. We are a republic, and I support legal immigration where the immigrant wants to come to our great country, live their version of the American dream, and contribute. Thanks for the question, Terry.
Okay, so just a reminder to press *3 to enter a question in the queue. Up next, we have a question from Dale. This question has to do with helping local county sheriffs with our meth issue. Dale, you are now live on the call.
Thank you, Representative Stauber, and I really appreciate the good job you're doing. I talk quite frequently with both local county sheriffs, Crow Wing and Aiken County, about a big problem they're having with meth addiction and the drugs that are coming into all of Minnesota, obviously, but coming into rural Minnesota. And I'm just wondering if there isn't something our federal law enforcement folks couldn't be doing kind of more in an overarching. They've got some skill sets that probably our local sheriff's department don't have, and I don't know if there's a way to bring them to bear and provide a little more support, because as you know, as a career law enforcement guy, the folks on the street are fighting this in the front line, but I'm thinking we need a little more support from the federal government, kind of an overarching thing that would support our local law enforcement folks.
Yeah, Dale. Dale, we can talk about. You're absolutely right. The drug addiction problem, the opioid crisis, it's real. As my background, I've given too many death notifications to unsuspecting parents, and so here's one of the things that I have been I really have the privilege of standing in front of groups or certain, talking about certain legislation. From my experience, there's very few members in Congress, both the House and the Senate, that have ever worn the law enforcement uniform. So we have, those of us who have served have credibility in talking about the drug issue. One of the things, Dale, that we're trying to do, and I've supported and wrote a letter on behalf, is the HIDA money, HIDA, which is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. And we're looking at, when I first started in my law enforcement career, Dale, we looked at the city of Minneapolis as kind of the hub. They were bringing the drugs from our southern border into, for instance, Denver, Chicago, and other parts of the East Coast, and then running them north. And when I first started, they were basically the hub was in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Guess what? The hub now is in northern Minnesota. The hub is in Duluth, and the spokes reach out to, the Aiken, St. Louis, Crow Wing, Lake, Cook, Couchiching, Isanti County. They reach everywhere, and so that money is federal money designated for Drug and Gang Task Force to target these individuals and to stop the flow of illegal drugs. And one of the things, Dale, I'll tell you, is there's three things. There's three things that we must concentrate on to solve this crisis. Number one is prevention. We have to prevent our young kids from succumbing to peer pressure in that, for a lack of a better term, soft moment to, quote, try or experiment with, because that's the time that they can get addicted or hooked. And the second thing is treatment. We have to have treatment facilities, Dale, that are open at the time the addict needs the help. At their lowest point is when the addict will ask for help. We as society cannot, when an addict asks for help, he or she is on the low point of that, quote, high. They're asking for help. And when they do that, the door has to be open, because if we as society say, okay, John Doe, thanks for asking for help for your addiction. We're going to put you in get you in treatment in 30 days. That's too late, Dale. We have to do it right away. And then the prosecution. We have to prosecute these drug dealers that are killing our kids, our friends, and our family members, because it's devastating to the families and our communities. It is not a victimless crime. And I will say this, Dale. There's a push to have legalized marijuana, like the state of Colorado, legalized marijuana. I would say this: I totally am against it. I disagree with that, because I believe it's a gateway drug. I can tell you 4 kids that I dealt with as a police officer. 3 of the 4 are not with us because of a drug overdose, and they started with marijuana. And there's a lot of examples, the devastation that marijuana does to our brains, does to our as we grow up, how it affects us. And so I asked this: how many more people, impaired drivers, do we want on the road? How many more do we want? And we, as a community, need to step up and say no. We have right now we have the governor talking about the potential of legalizing marijuana, and then also in the same sentence talks about the ability to have more drug treatment clinics. To me, why don't we just not legalize it because it's bad, and make sure that treatment facilities are open for those current folks that want help, and we can do better. Now, with that being said, Dale, I will say this: that there is science to some part of the plant that may be beneficial for chronic diseases and what have you. To have the ability to look at that option for somebody that's chronically ill or terminally ill, I think we have an obligation to at least have that conversation. But I will not support legalizing marijuana so our young kids can smoke on the street corner and think it's legal. So, and I think, Dale, you would agree that we've got to take this and hit it head on and make sure that our rural representation is part of that equation. That federal money for a HIDA, that federal money for a drug treatment and rehabilitation is front and center, because we who live in rural America and rural Minnesota should never take a back seat on these types of issues.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Just a reminder to everyone to press *3 if you have a question for the Congressman. So up next we have a question from Shauna. Shauna has a question about abortion. Shauna, you are now live on the call.
Thank you, Representative Stauber, for taking my call. Thank you again for being a pro-life representative, but also just having a lot of common sense. We don't see that a lot in politics these days. My question is not necessarily on abortion, but is more general, having to do with many of the life issues. I'm a healthcare provider in Duluth, and I've worked in many states where we've seen laws not only on abortion, but on euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide advance. And knowing this year the law that they tried to pass in Minnesota and hearing some of the language in that discusses no opt-outs for hospitals and for healthcare providers, I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do as far as, of course, we want to protect life at all stages. I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to protect healthcare providers like myself who went into this business to help people get healthier or to walk with them through their suffering. And at no cost would I ever want to be involved in taking someone's life, no matter how old they were, whether it's at the beginning of life or at the end of life. You know, I oftentimes think when I hear things like this, I'm going to have to find another job, and I'm not qualified for much. I'm a single mom of 2 kids, and I can't take a job that makes half my salary because I have student loans. I have things to pay, but I don't feel, is there anything that protects us as healthcare providers? The majority of us don't agree with these things that are being pushed into society as being normal or being helpful. They're not even healthcare.
Yeah. No, Shauna, it's a perfect, very good question, especially timely question in the environment we're living in. And as we move towards the election, there's going to be more focus on pro-life and abortion conversations. And first of all, I think, Shauna, you and I share the same opinion that life begins at conception and ends at natural death, and that for me, standing on the House floor today, talking about protecting those babies who survived an abortion, that they need to be given that care just like any other infant that has been born. You stated you have 2 children, 2 beautiful children. My wife and I are blessed with 4 beautiful children, and I have to tell you that I was present at each of their births, and I can't tell you in my own mind what a miracle life is. To see my children, my wife birth my children. It's just a beautiful moment in our lives, and we have to make sure that in our conversations, if we run into a woman in crisis pregnancy, that we nurture her, we give her support, we give her options, and of course we want to make sure that life is one of those options, that she chooses life. And that we also have to look at that there's the adoption, having the availability to put that child up for adoption. But we have to nurture that mom through that pregnancy and make sure that in our mind that she chooses life for that child. And that's why Shauna, one of the very first things I did when I got to Congress, I sent a letter to our president asking him to veto legislation that weakened the pro-life protections. He then announced that he would do just that at the March for Life. We must be supportive of women's health care, and at the same time, if it is against a doctor's religion to perform an abortion or euthanasia, they should not be forced to perform such a procedure. And I think that's fundamentally part of our discussion and part of that equation. And that's, I think, Shauna, you brought that up. If it's truly against your conscience that you shouldn't have to suggest that, support it, or perform it or what have you, or push into it. Our goal is to, our goal right now, and I think it should be, is we need to honor life. Every life is precious. Many years ago, I was a police officer in Duluth, and I worked an event. There's a gal, she has now passed away. Her name is Norma McCorvey. She came to Duluth. She was the Jane Doe and Roe versus Wade. And remember, Norma McCorvey worked at a Planned Parenthood for her early part of her life. The latter part of her life, she changed her position and became an ardent advocate for pro-life legislation and pro-life causes. And she talked about just in that defining moment, and she talks about how she felt guilty for what she did earlier in her career. And Shauna, for those of you who are on the line, it's a book. Norma McCorvey helped write a book. It's called Won by Love, and the title is Won, W-O-N, by Love. I can say that I read that book many years ago. I couldn't put it down. It was so fascinating how through her conscience and prayer that she changed to that being supportive of life. And so, Shauna, keep the good conversations, keep our conversations civil, because life matters. Every human being can give us their time, treasure, and talents, and make our communities a much better place. And so, Shauna, thanks for the call.
All right, everyone, we have time for just one more question. We have Andy from Brainerd up next, and he has a question on health care. Andy, you are now live on the call.
Hi, thanks for your time. Real quick, I started a small business when I was 20 years old, and it was affordable to do it because of expenses and whatever else. Now at this point, after 20 years, and I'm obviously self-employed, I don't have any employees, but every day that I get up, because when you're a self-employed person, you count the pennies, or you see where you're at financially with everything. For my health care plus medication and my deductibles, it costs me $43.28 every single day that I get up and go to work for the year before anything is paid out of pocket. So at that point, it's close to $16,000 that I'm paying out. And when a guy gets up and leaves to go to work in the morning, and you think you got to make that $43 to even break even for the day, to me, it's just I've gotten to the point where you just want to throw your hands up in the air and say, I'm done. I'll go work for somebody. And also, I feel that it's enabling people. Let's say an electrician that works for a guy that has a wife and 4 kids. He's probably way better than his boss, but he can't afford to start on his own because of the health care and what it's going to cost him to support his family. How do you feel about that, and what's it going to take? The $43 is too much for me every single day. If you go to church on Sunday and give $20, you're in for $63 that day.
Right. No, Andy, that is first of all, thanks for the question. And you and I have a lot in common that we were small business owners. I'm still a small business owner. You wanted the American dream, the entrepreneur spirit that you put forward. You invested your capital in whatever business it was, just like me. And small businesses, Andy, are the engine of our economy. So I would encourage you to really keep the faith in that we in DC can do things right. That we want to make sure that our healthcare is assessed, we can access it, that it's affordable and it's of quality. And we talk about the price for prescription drugs, and we talked about that earlier. We had a bill that was very transparent, that was bipartisan, but this leadership, Speaker Pelosi, just wouldn't let it go without putting some what we call poison pills in it, and it's very frustrating. And I was a co-sponsor, and I'm a co-sponsor of the Pre-Existing Conditions Protection Act, which continues coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. I campaign on it. and I'm living my campaign promise by voting for actions such as that. And this is for me. It's I want to make sure that our constituents know that I'm working I'm working at making sure that our health care is affordable, and we talk about associated health plans for small businesses. I mean, that's important that we're able to pool some of our resources, and we also have to have competition in our health care. In any other entity, when there's competition, is good for the consumer, and so when we put competition in the private market, it's very good for the consumer. And so our goal is, my whole, the whole philosophy is I want to make sure that we improve our health care, and I want to be able to say that it's not necessarily easy, but I'm pushing to make sure that you, Andy, and your family and make the call on what you need for health care, not the politicians or the bureaucrats in Washington. And I think that when you start peeling the layers of the onions, I think we can come down to a very good consensus that don't bring your red playbook or blue playbook, Andy. Bring a playbook that helps Main Street Minnesotan, just like you and I. And I think it's important that for you to say that's $43.28 a day is just a startup. I mean, come on. I know we can do better, and I think it's important that I'm working across the aisle. I want to get let's bring the best practices that are competitive in the private market. Let that drive and bring the cost down, and make sure that our drug prices are transparent. We can bring generics in sooner, and that we have the ability to have that conversation. And I can tell you that this is extremely important. And my goal is to try and make sure that we get some legislation that promotes the ability to have our health care affordable, accessible, and of quality very, very soon. But sometimes when you get into this town, unfortunately, they play politics as a winner and loser. That's one of the frustrating things for me. Andy, I don't know, and I don't care what your political leanings are. You ought to be able to afford your health insurance for you and your family, and be an entrepreneur and a small business owner without having to deal with the excess cost. And I know we can do it, and I'm bringing some of those that conversation. I'm bringing that conversation to the meetings and the discussions I have right here in this town. So the whole goal is to change the way we're doing things, make sure that we collectively bring the best practices forward to reduce cost across the board. So, Andy, thank you for your call, and I want to apologize to all the other folks that we didn't get to speak with. But if you still want us to call or talk to me, you can call the office at 218-481-6396, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as practical. And I really appreciate this opportunity to spend some time with you this evening and just kind of share my thoughts and visions of where we're going. And I want to stress with you that constituent services is the absolute number one priority. The Minnesota 8th, the district citizens are the priority, and you will continue to be the priority. Thank you so much for allowing me to serve you in this capacity, and I want you all to have a good night.